Hey everyone, it's Jamison Cable of the Land Between the Meadows, Kentucky History Podcast. I just want to say thank you for your support and listening to this episode. For all the updates on our podcast and YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kentucky History Channel, like and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at KY History Pod. If you're enjoying the podcast, give us a good rating and review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast platform that you're listening to. If you're looking for ways to support the podcast, an easy and simple way is to share it on Facebook or any other social media and tell your friends. You can also go to audibletrial.com/KYHistoryPod and get a free book of your choice. And finally, you can visit patreon.com/KYHistoryPod if you want extra content from us. If you're already a patron, thank you for your support. It means so much to us. All the links I've mentioned are in the description of the podcast, so go check them out. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoy this episode. And remember, if it's not about Kentucky, it ain't worth a hill of beans. Welcome back, everybody, to the Land Between the Meadows, the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jamison Cable, and we are finally back and glad to be together with Mr. Pope's back with us. How's it going, Mr. Pope?
Oh, praise the Lord. I'm so glad to be here. I have missed these podcasts and reading history books. I haven't stopped reading, but, with the coronavirus going on, it affords you a great opportunity to watch. I watch Gunsmoke every day, so I'm well loaded on history, and read some good books, and just eating it up. It's, you can take a bad situation like that we're all feeling in this country and turn it into something good, Instead of fighting with the wife, I read a book about every 2 days, and I'm into it. I'm into it.
You are prepared to podcast it for the rest of the summer?
Yeah.
Years to come, you have
I'm here, man, till the lights go out, which they may go. I'm here. I'm fired up.
Well,
I've read some good books, and later on some books I'd recommend. If you like action and history.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad that we've been able to get together finally. I've trying to keep the ship afloat, talking to myself about Lincoln County.
And I know, we left off talking a lot about coal as well as everything else, and you've mentioned the name John C.C. Mayo.
That's right, and I finished this book 2-3 months ago, and now we get to talk about it. We get to go into.
I'm excited to hear about it because I know that's kind of your thing in this podcast.
It's interesting, and he's an interesting fella. And we come in and have our kind of conclusions already made that he's kind of a bad guy. He was fueled by greed, but after reading this biography about him, I'm going to try to persuade you, Mr. Pope, to say maybe he wasn't as bad as we thought. Or maybe he had some other motives that we should consider. Yeah. So that's going to be my goal.
Yeah. Good luck.
I don't know if I'll be able to persuade you, and I'm not going to say. Well, I'll leave my conclusion for the end as well.
And I know you from Rockcastle County, so Mayo is indirectly touched you and your history of your county.
Yeah.
With coal and so forth, and actually, my family owned some land up in eastern Kentucky. My father did, and. We were confronted with the broad form deed and so forth. So I have experience with it. This was in the 1970s and 60s. And we actually made some extra income off of it. We had 360-acre farm up there.
Oh, wow.
And we had a broad form deed. Oh. And we got income from it.
Cool.
Every year.
Well, that worked out for you.
Oh, yeah, man. So if there's money involved, it must be okay. If you're on the receiving end.
Yeah. So... with old John C.C. Mayo.
Who is this guy?
He's an Eastern Kentucky guy. He is known for many names. The Cumberland Capitalist is one, and that's kind of, I guess that's the one that sticks. The Mountain Millionaire is another. But we got to start when we start talking about John, and I'll try to refer to him as John to keep it going. But we got to start with his lineage. Where'd he come from? And that's my big string puller. Is this? I'm going to try to help persuade you. He comes from a line of teachers.
Oh, man.
Yes.
He's got to be all right.
Yeah, he's good.
Just like us. Both of us are teachers, elementary teachers.
Yeah. So his great-grandfather, Lewis Mayo, he came from Middlesex, is that right?
Yeah.
Middlesex County, Virginia, to Johnson County, Kentucky.
Sex.
Yeah. And his whole goal, his mission, was to come to Eastern Kentucky and start an educational program in the mountains. And he founded, or him and his brother, I guess, helped start the Prestonsburg Academy. And however, he died, though, before John C.C. Mayo was even born. But he actually wrote a book of arithmetic on deerskin, which, was pretty cool.
That's real cool. Yeah. On deerskin.
And I don't know his birth date.
Shows your resources were a little limited.
Yeah. I don't know his birth date exactly.
Who, Mayo's?
Well, his great-grandfather.
Okay.
I mean, it would obviously, I would think, would be before 1800 in Virginia, maybe a little bit after and so forth. If he died 2 years before Mayo was born, which Mayo was born in 1864. So, give it or take, I'm not sure. But anyway, that was that. But his grandfather was George Washington Mayo. And he, however, did not become a teacher, but he did marry He married a lady named Sarah Auxier, and she was kind of, I guess had money, if you want to go with it that way. But then let's go to his father. His father was Thomas Jefferson Mayo, and if you notice these names, they're very, very interesting. Yep. And he did take up teaching, but he moved around between Pike and Golinar, Pike County, in Pike County, and he married Mary Elizabeth Leslie in 1863, and then, of course, a year later, his son was born. But the big thing I want to point out with the Mayos that they were a bit different. They not as in odd, but different as in they didn't necessarily form to the traditional mountain sort of culture or mountain sort of traditions. Mayo, his Thomas Jefferson Mayo, the typical age of marriage in the mountains, I guess during this time, for girls was like 13.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
For boys, it was like 16. I mean, these are super young. However, for Thomas Jefferson Mayo, he was 22 and his wife was 23. So I mean, take a little time. They did not rush into it as in, or whatever it may have been the situation. But anyway, so John C.C. Mayo is born on September 16th, 1864. He's the oldest.
Smart. You're smart not to rush into marriage. Just say it.
Yeah. And now his name is John Caldwell Calhoun Mayo.
Yeah.
Do you know who John Caldwell Calhoun is?
No.
You don't? Really?
John Calhoun from South Carolina?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yes,
I wondered about that when I saw his name. Yeah.
So can tell our listeners who he is real quick.
Well, John Calhoun was one of the ones that really started the Civil War. He was a secessionist.
Yes.
And kind of known as a hothead. And he beat people with canes and everything else. And he very outspoken, was one of the most outspoken leaders during that time period, and he was for secession. He was pro-slavery big time, and he was linked up with aristocrats and plantation owners in the South and in South Carolina in particular.
So
he was a powerful congressman, senator.
Yes. So that sets up this county divide. So in Kentucky, and I mean this is 1864 when John C.C. Mayo was born. So I mean the Civil War is just now starting to wind down.
But to name him after Calhoun tells
a big thing,
especially in Eastern Kentucky. I mean, it's like, whoa, we're pro-Southern here in Eastern Kentucky Union County. And
that shows that's what was the tradition. You named your kid after a Union person. If you were a Union, if you were Confederate, you name them after Confederate.
Sometimes I think it's more radical than that. I think you name it after your father, and a continuation, especially if you're the first son. That's pretty radical of that time to be. And it sounds like it's a family tradition. You got Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and then you got this Southern hothead, who started the Civil War. And in 1860, what was it, 3 or 4? right towards the end of the war.
1864,
and still he's still waving that Confederate flag, in eastern Kentucky.
Yeah.
I mean, these were radical people.
That was. It was a bit.
They were radical people. You just don't see that much.
Yeah. So that's pretty much, I mean, so this has all happened. And T.J. Mayo, or Thomas Jefferson Mayo, he moves back to Paintsville, and where his famous grandfather was from, George Washington Mayo. And that pretty much ends it for his lineage, I guess, for Thomas, or for John C.C. Mayo's parents and stuff, because the Mayos had established a pretty big power in Floyd and Pike County at this time. They were well financed, and the family had some political positions and so forth. But anyway, T.J. Thomas Jefferson, he taught school, and it's important also to note how much they valued education. And they even had which goes back to his great grandfather, but they even had what you would call a unique approach to education as well. I mean, their thought of education was, we pass our kids around to our family. And so they would say if you were, they had an uncle that was a banker, well, you went and worked with your uncle for a while to learn about banking.
Hands-on.
Yeah, you have an uncle that's a carpenter, an aunt that does sewing and stuff. You go live with them for a while, and you learn these trades, and that's kind of their approach, a real hands-on approach to educating their kids. Of course, their kids went to the normal schools as well, which we'll get into that in a minute. But it was very, I guess, more typical than what you would find around in eastern Kentucky at the time, for sure.
Or anywhere, really.
Yeah, anywhere, yeah. So Thomas Jefferson, like we said, he gets elected to the House of Representatives.
But going back just a little bit, that's what doctors did. A lot of times they didn't go to just colleges necessarily and study. They were subscribed to a particular physician and practically lived with him and witnessed, and went through, professional training that way. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and another thing about Thomas Jefferson Mayo, another different thing. Typical families were about 13 kids. He only had 7, which is, I mean, that sounds like
Scares
too many
me.
to me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. But anyway, so his father gives up teaching and hires
I gave up after 2.
But his father gives up teaching.
We won't go into that.
Yeah, we won't get into that too much. And he hires like a board teacher, which we talked about how teachers would live in a house, and this is kind of the way it went. But anyway, so John C.C. Mayo is taught by a board teacher who teaches in his home. But school terms at the time were only about 3 months. They only had 3 months of school.
Got to work.
Yep. But again, if you're sending your kids around all these other places, they're getting education.
That's right.
Quite quickly. But there's two views of Eastern Kentucky at this time, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit. But there's 2 views. You were either a mountain man or you were a mountaineer. Now, a mountain man was somebody who lived in the mountains, loved them, and took pride in them. But they longed to get other people to view the mountains as they did. And the mountain men of Cumberland, or the Cumberlands, were educated. They lived in town. They did not speak necessarily in that traditional mountain dialect. And, they didn't appear necessarily that different from, say, the Flatlanders, or people from central Kentucky and so forth. That was the mountain men. Now, the mountaineers, on the other hand, they retreated into the hollers. They disrupted the Flatlanders. They didn't like them. They retained their mountain dialect and their Calvinistic fatalism was what it got from. That was the 2 views.
Fatalism.
Yeah. Now the mountain men, or the Mayos, they were mountain men. They were, people they educated. They stayed. They lived in town and so forth. And you're going to see this disdain for the Flatlanders that'll come in, or the people from central Kentucky. Students in the mountains often became the teachers. So John C.C. Mayo became a teacher at the age of 15, which,
pretty early.
Pretty early.
But again, not that unusual.
Not unusual,
My grandpa became a teacher about 16 in East Tennessee.
So he teaches for a few years, and eventually he does go to Kentucky Wesleyan College in what was, at the time it was in Millersburg, which is in Bourbon County, mainly because of the Methodist It was, is affiliated with the Methodists, and his family was, very strong Methodist. Which Kentucky Wesleyan is now, it's all the way in Western Kentucky now, I think, isn't it, or somewhere?
I think so.
Yeah. But he attended the school in 1880 to 1883.
Notice the big connection of education back then related to churches. And we still have that today. It's very weak, but in most cases it's weak. Church-sponsored universities.
Yes.
You can think of a lot of them.
Yeah.
And some you go to and you don't even know that they're sponsored by a certain church. But back then, school education and the Bible, we're not far removed.
Yeah. So he never graduates though from.
Do we teach the Bible today in school?
Well, I mean,
Mr. Cable?
No, we don't.
Are those fundamental principles taught, do you think?
The fundamental principles, yes, I would.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. But I guess we don't necessarily say this is from the Bible.
Yeah.
We in my class personally, we read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which has very much biblical connections.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And we get into that. But
it's hard. It's hard not to.
It is.
It's like what is our basis of right and wrong? And I know you're going to be going into that today with Mayo.
Yeah. So he's working these various jobs. He's at school. He never graduates. He's there for many years, but he takes a year off and goes and teaches in Montgomery County for a while. But the teachers there notice how smart he is with mathematics, and he becomes an assistant instructor. So he doesn't graduate with a degree or anything, but he becomes an assistant instructor. But he also doesn't want to become a teacher, or he doesn't want to get a teaching degree. I mean, just think you've been teaching since you're 15. You're going to go to college and get a degree in teaching. Well, you wouldn't need that. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's here in his school. In a class he takes called of geology and mineralogy, and that's when he discovers how much Eastern Kentucky is worth. And this is where his plans begin to see. He sees the value that Eastern Kentucky has, the coal, and
he's able to put two and two together and make four. Because at this point, coal is not a resource that people are clamoring to.
No.
But he sees the future in it. He sees coal and industrialization in America heading in that industrial realm.
And at the time,
makes that connection.
Most of the coal that is used is from Pennsylvania.
Right.
There's not, nobody's using Kentucky coal at all. It's not even being...
Just like we talked about in further podcasts, the rail system had not reached in there quite yet.
Yeah, and that's where we're getting to. But anyway, this also, while he's at school, is when he begins to get his disdain or distaste for the Bluegrass Boys. Is what he forms a club at college called the Big Sandy Club, for the Eastern Kentucky Boys, and he's a rivalry is created between.
It's a little surprising to me because you described him as a mountain man, and those are the ones that are sophisticated, like the Bluegrass people, and yet he's rejecting the Bluegrass people, who in a lot of ways have similar values to himself.
They do.
So that doesn't make any sense.
It does, and it goes to probably pride, arrogance,
regionalism.
Yes, and that begins to be his big desires. He wants to prove that Eastern Kentucky is the most valuable part of Kentucky, and I'm sure at times with the Bluegrass Boys and stuff, there's banter back and forth. Not a lot is really talked about that in the book, but that becomes his goal. His goal is to show the value of Eastern Kentucky and to beat out or show the Bluegrass Boys that
Did you feel competition growing up in Rockcastle County with Central Kentucky?
Well,
did you feel inferior, or did you feel resentful, or did you feel like you had something to prove?
Not really.
Like you just didn't like him, sons of bucks?
And it's funny you bring that up because, like in high school, I was talking to somebody a few days ago about this, and in high school, the rivalry is sports related or and that sort of stuff, and so that sort of relation. Bull County and Danville, we never liked Bull County and Danville. That they were more sophisticated, educated, better than us at sports, and so they were more of you can classify them as city, but that's what it became more. It becomes more of a grudge in that sense, and I didn't really notice or think of anything differently as far as like Eastern Kentucky versus Central Kentucky
It
until
might be your personality and your education because you kind of see
a little more
beyond
mellow.
You mellowed out. You were mellowed from the beginning.
But whenever I went to college in Lexington,
But your buddies and friends.
they're ready to fit anybody.
Let's fit.
We gonna fit them boys in.
Why?
Well,
because you know where they're from. Let's fit them.
Well, we could get into many sports fights that happened over football. But
this plays into the.
It does.
It takes us back to Mayo and the way we look at him, the way he looks at himself, and why. Yeah.
But anyway, my biggest time was when I was in Lexington, and people would ask you about your accent, and like, buddy, I'm 30 minutes south. What do you mean?
Yeah.
I'm sure I do have an accent.
You do.
But, considering, just because you're in Lexington doesn't mean you.
Well, if you're in Rockcastle County, you don't have an accent.
But yeah, exactly.
Everybody talks like you do.
Yeah. Ain't nobody sounding any different around here.
No, that's right.
But anyway, so this is my big point, I guess, at this point, is that he develops this grudge, and that becomes his plan or his motivation. And so forth. But he goes back home. He never graduates. He goes back home. And, of course, he starts teaching again. However, though, he was a different style of teacher. He, instead of, you think of a one-room school with a few desks, a chalkboard, that's it, right? I mean, that's what you would expect. Mayo, on this hand, was different. He had flowers, rugs, decorations. His philosophy was to make the students comfortable and they'll learn better, which is way above
everybody else.
His time. I mean, my grandparents went to.
Do you feel comfortable saying, "Oh, well, let me get you a pillow"?
Yeah. Oh, you didn't get the right ruler to the hand.
Yeah, right. I'll whip you. I'll beat you.
Oh, y'all sit down and shut up.
Yeah.
Listen, but that's kind of the way it went. That was his different style. I mean, and it shows,
sophistication.
He was above his time.
He was
in teaching and in this goal to get coal. But anyway, he moved back home, and here's another interesting thing. We talked about the southern part. During this time, still in Johnson County in this area, Prestonsburg. Did I say Prestonsburg? Yeah.
Johnson County.
Yeah, Johnson County. Yeah.
And, Lawrence County.
Eastern Kentucky, let's just say. The schools, they had a Democrat school and a Republican school. However, he went with the typical family tradition and taught at the Democratic school. But he actually was able to unite both schools and bring them both together and get go away from this. This was probably 20 years after the Civil War. So and again, the kids he's teaching didn't have any affiliation.
As you tell this story, I was thinking about this riding down on country roads today. I mean, when you're talking about 1880s, and you talk about Eastern Kentucky and Johnson County and Lawrence back in there, gosh, there were no automobiles. They were just horse trails. And, riding horses. I mean, and you're talking about, he's sophisticated, and he's running these schools. I mean, man, that area was just wild and wide open, and the towns were just, clapboard side buildings and log cabins, and patches on hillsides and, mom and cornbread, and it was just, let's have squirrel for dinner tonight.
Yeah.
And that's
survival.
Is total survival, subsistence living. And wild without automobiles. It's like, well, he went to Montgomery County, and taught, and then he went to Bourbon County and was educated. I mean, people didn't get out of their counties. I mean, most people never left their counties their whole lives.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that. All right. We're talking about a little bit about that too.
Well, I can see it coming.
It's coming.
And here's the thing. We've talked about this before, and one of the most interesting things I've found in teaching history for 34 years, social studies, is history and people. If you create an environment, a good environment, good things happen. If you create a bad environment, bad things happen. But it's the environment you create, just like with plants and animals, how you treat them, how they live, it creates things happening. I mean, I can create a civil war today by posting on my phone certain things to get people angry.
Oh, yeah, and they'll fire up.
They'll fire up real quick, or I can be peaceful. I mean, even Jesus talked about that. Are you fanning the flames, man, or you're trying to put out the fire?
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's a lesson. That's a lesson we all need to learn and keep in mind, especially today.
I know
in today's time.
So true.
Thanks again, everybody, for listening. This is going to wrap up our first part about John C.C. Mayo. He is a very interesting character, and we will probably have more than 2, maybe 3, maybe even 4 episodes covering him and his complex life. Again, you can contact us at KY History Pod on Twitter or Facebook, or you can email us, thelandbetweenthemeadows@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and stay safe out there, and pray for our country and the people in it. We'll see you next time.